She pressed her daughter close and prepared to surrender to the endless night, but warmth found them both. Kethera Station had become a monument to cosmic ambition. Gone wrong, the swiftest colonial failure in recorded galactic expansion. Now, amid its storm-battered remains, a woman and her child drew what might be their final breaths. The orbital platform had once thrummed with possibility, funded by the Nexus Corporate Alliance. Its crystalline superstructure was meant to harness stellar radiation through quantum collectors and atmospheric processors. Settlements were blueprinted, trade networks mapped, shipping lanes established. But the endeavor crumbled beneath its own complexity. The energy cores proved unstable, the weather systems uncontrollable, fusion reactors overloaded, living quarters shattered. Resources evaporated. The corporation evacuated within 8 standard cycles, abandoning only corroded frameworks and broken promises. None remained except the Forsaken. Vera's bare solace sank into the crystalline dust with each labored step, her feet numb beyond sensation. The frayed edges of her ceremonial vestments fluttered weakly, crusted with frost. Her azure skin, mottled by cold, appeared nearly violet in the dim starlight. Threads of silver hair clung to her face, frozen by her own exhalations dot in her arms. Lay Zara, small and still, barely stirring. Her luminescent markings, bioluminescent patterns scattered across her temples, flickered dimly. A child's radiance should never dim like this. "Mother," she whispered, her voice barely vibrating against Vera's chest. So cold, her hair, long and silver like her mother's, brushed against Vera's skin. Vera pulled her daughter tighter, shielding her with what little body heat remained. "Sleep now," she murmured in their ancestral tongue, her breath fracturing. "Dreams are warmer than waking." She stumbled forward, knowing this hour would be her last. They had been refused entry at every sanctuary across Kethera Station's remains. 23 shelters, 23 denials. Automated sentries, AI-controlled trading posts that scanned her empty credit band and sealed their entrances without acknowledgement. No settlement would accept a starving alien woman and her child, not without currency, not without influence, not without a name that carried weight. Her name had once carried weight. She had been Vera Soulwind of the Crystal Dawn Circle, honored for their sacred connection to life and luminescence. She had cradled newborns wrapped in star silk, had sung over pools of healing essence. Her hands were once kissed in reverence, then her partner perished. The Circle elders declared her spiritually corrupted, incomplete. A woman unable to sustain her child alone was deemed to possess a fractured soul. She had stood before the temple threshold, Zara in her arms, and whispered, "I can still nurture her." The door had sealed. No ceremony, no benediction, only banishment. The memory burned fiercer than the cold ever could. Her knees collapsed beneath a twisted energy conduit. She fell into the dust with a cry that died in her throat. The wind shrieked through severed cables overhead. She curled around Zara, trying to shield her daughter's back with her body. "I'm here," she breathed. "We're already dreaming, little star. Keep dreaming." Zara whimpered, one small hand clutching Vera's tattered braid. Her eyes closed, and finally, so did her mother's. Her body went limp, surrendering to stillness. High above on the fractured edge of a nearby fusion plant, Jonah spotted movement. Through the tempest. The storm had driven him out again. Sensor Array 5 had failed, and his thermal lines were fluctuating, threatening system collapse. Just another crisis in an endless sequence of breakdowns. He hadn't expected to see life this far out. Perhaps wind-scattered debris. Then he witnessed the figure fall. He froze. A form, then another smaller, rapped against the first. His stomach plummeted. Jonas ran. Dust whipped into his face shield, blinding and stinging. He stumbled over. warped supports and fallen conduits, boots crushing over half-buried cables. He reached them within moments, but it felt eternally too late. A woman azure skin, silver hair matted to her face, clutching a child whose bioluminescent glow was fading by the second. He dropped beside them. No, come on, he muttered, tearing open his emergency pack. His hands shook as he pressed a vital signs monitor to the child's neck. Still there, weak but steady. He activated 2 thermal units and slipped them between their bodies. The woman didn't respond. Her skin was ice cold, her breathing shallow. "You're not dying here," he growled. "Not tonight." He unzipped his jacket, wrapping it around both of them, and lifted them into his arms. Their weight shocked him. They were too light, too fragile. Just like before, he thought, and for a breathless instant he was back in that medical transport 3 years ago, holding his nephew's fevered body while the clinic refused them entry. This time, he had another chance. Jonas staggered back across the dust-choked courtyard, the wind fighting every step. By the time he reached his outpost, his lungs burned and his legs nearly buckled. The airlock sealed behind him with a hiss of pressurized atmosphere. Warmth surged from the floor vents. He moved quickly, laying the child in a heating cradle fashioned from an old thermal blanket and an emergency lamp. The woman he positioned near the main reactor duct where warm air flowed through a repurposed ventilation pipe. Then he waited. He stripped off his jacket and gloves, sitting with his back against the wall, feeding tube in hand. Carefully, he gave the child sips of warm nutrient solution. The girl coughed, drank, and whimpered. Her temples glowed slightly brighter. Hours passed. The woman remained motionless, but the child stirred. Small fingers reached toward Jonas's sleeve. Her eyes opened slowly, shining faintly in the dim orange light. "You're not frightening," the child whispered, her voice rough and dreamy. Jonas smiled. "Just tired, like you, little one." The girl blinked, then sipped again from the tube. "Tastes like sunshine." Jonas nearly laughed. "Close enough." The girl curled beside the heater and let her eyes fall shut again. Only then, long minutes later, did the woman move. The first sensation Vera experienced was warmth, not imagined warmth, not the false fire of dreams, but real heat radiating against her skin, soft and steady, pulsing with her own slow heartbeat. She didn't open her eyes immediately. She wasn't certain she possessed them. Her body felt distant, numb, but not lost. Her breath came shallow, tasting of metal and something faintly sweet. Her mind drifted in fragments, wind, dust, the silence after a cry, Zara's weight against her chest. She jolted. Her eyes snapped open. Overhead, a light blinked weakly in a curved ceiling of dull, patched metal. The air was dry, filtered. Somewhere in the distance, something hissed and clicked in regular intervals, an old ventilation system perhaps. Her body was wrapped in fabric, soft, thick. She didn't remember lying down. She didn't remember being moved. She sat up too quickly. Pain speared through her back. Her limbs trembled under the sudden motion. Her skin burned with needles as circulation returned to places the cold had abandoned. She gritted her teeth and forced herself upright, blinking through dizziness. Then she saw her curled under a coil of orange thermal tubing just a few feet away. Small body, long silver hair fanned across a blanket, temples faintly glowing. Breathing, breathing. "Zara," she whispered, her voice breaking. She crawled the short distance and collapsed beside her daughter, pulling her into her arms. Zara stirred with a small grunt, wriggling in protest, then relaxed against her mother's chest without opening her eyes. Vera held her tighter than she meant to, chest shaking with the effort of not falling apart. She was alive. They were both. A shadow moved across the wall. She turned. He stood on the other side of the room, a human man, taller than she'd expected, dressed in layered utility clothing worn at the seams. His hair was dark, slightly curled at the edges. His face was unshaven and hollowed with exhaustion. He held a metal cup in one hand, steam rising from it in lazy spirals. He didn't speak, didn't step closer. Just stood there watching her with the quiet, patient stillness of someone who'd spent too long around things that break. She stared at him, heartbeat pounding in her throat. His voice, when it came, was low. Rough, but not unkind. She's stable. You too, mostly. Took some work to get your circulation back. She didn't answer. Her hands tightened slightly on Zara. I'm not here to hurt you, he added. You collapsed near my perimeter array. I brought you in. Still, she said nothing. He crouched slowly and placed the cup on the floor halfway between them. Then he stood again and stepped back. Nutrient broth. Weak warm. You should drink. She looked down at the cup, then at her daughter. Her throat moved dry and raw. How long have we? Half a day, maybe more. He scratched the back of his neck. You were nearly frozen solid. I thought you were dead. She glanced around. The space was cramped but clean, an old climate shelter, likely repurposed. Generator humming low, lights, a patchwork of machinery pressed against the walls. Makeshift hydro tanks, a heat exchanger, old communication equipment blinking in standby. A survivor's den. He walked back to a worn bench and sat down slowly, wincing as he adjusted a brace around his knee. He leaned back, letting his head rest against the wall, eyes half closed. I'll give you space. I know how it feels waking up in a strange place. Vera hesitated, then reached out and lifted the cup. Her hands trembled as she brought it to her lips. The broth was thin and bland, but the warmth struck like a memory. She swallowed once, twice each sip anchoring her a little more in her own body. She looked down at Zara again. Her daughter stirred, opened her eyes briefly. Mother, she mumbled. I'm here, Vera whispered, brushing hair from her daughter's face. Zara's hand reached up blindly, found the front of Vera's vestments, and gripped tightly. Her luminescent markings pulsed softly. Then she drifted off again. Jonas stood and moved toward the far end of the shelter where a narrow ladder led up into a side compartment. I'll be above, he said, pausing. Call if you need anything. He climbed the ladder and disappeared. Vera stayed there for a long time, curled around her child, her hands never leaving Zara's body. She didn't sleep. She listened to the soft hum of heat, to her daughter's steady breathing, to the strange quiet that came not from absence but from safety. It took hours before she moved again, only to stand and pour more broth. She drank slowly, studying the small signs around the shelter. Salvaged solar mesh, filtered air, synthetic bedding softened with wear. Nothing extravagant, everything cared for. He lives here, she thought, not just surviving, staying. And somehow, she and Zara had been allowed into that stillness. Later, when she laid back down beside her daughter, wrapping them both in the blanket he'd provided, her eyes drifted toward the ladder. For the first time in a long while, she let herself believe they weren't in danger. Not yet. Maybe not at all. The next morning arrived with silence, not the deadly kind Vera had grown accustomed to. The silence of abandoned buildings and frozen machines, but a softer one. The kind that comes after a long cry or deep sleep. Peaceful, unexpected. For a long time, she didn't move. She lay on her side, curled around Zara, watching the slow flicker of orange light on the shelter walls. Somewhere behind her, one of the geothermal pumps hissed softly through the venting system. A pulse of warmth drifted past her cheek. Her bones no longer ached as sharply. Her skin no longer burned with cold. Zara shifted against her chest. A tiny, satisfied murmur escaped her as her fingers clutched a fold of Vera's sleeve. She had slept through the night. Vera's throat tightened. Even when they'd had shelter in the past makeshift, temporary, half-broken Zara had never really slept, not deeply. Not without shivering or waking with a cry. Not without curling so tightly against her mother that Vera felt every little tremor of fear in her daughter's limbs. But now she rested like children were meant to. Vera pressed her lips to Zara's temple gently, as if any stronger contact might wake her. She let herself linger in the moment. That was new too, lingering. Her world had long ago stopped allowing it. She sat up slowly. Her body responded stiffly, but with more strength than yesterday. The soreness remained, but had lost its edge. Across the room, Jonas was seated near a disassembled panel, surrounded by parts. He hadn't noticed her yet. His dark hair was still damp, pushed back carelessly as if he'd recently scrubbed his face with water. A faded shirt clung to his arms, plain, stained, torn near the shoulder. He was muttering to himself under his breath, holding a tool in his teeth while adjusting a filament wire. He worked like someone who found clarity in function, and maybe, she thought, comfort in repetition. He glanced up. Their eyes met. He held her gaze just long enough to acknowledge her, then returned to his work. That simple gesture, that lack of demand, of intrusion, eased something in her chest again. "You slept?" he said without looking up. She nodded once. So did she. Good. He tightened the bolt. She needs food soon. There's a hand mixer and some dried fruit. I can soften it into a paste. Vera reached toward her daughter and gently lifted her from the blanket. Zara stirred, blinking slowly, then rested her head against her mother's collarbone with a small sigh. The sound was light, almost happy. Vera didn't remember the last time she'd heard it. Jonas stood, stretching his arms overhead. His spine cracked. Audibly, "You hungry?" he asked without turning. "You don't have to answer. I'll make enough either way." She watched him cross the room and start preparing something with mechanical precision. His hands were callous but precise, his movements economical, efficient. He didn't waste steps. Everything had a purpose. "I'm not used to people doing things without asking for something," she said. He paused for a moment but didn't look back. "Neither am I," he said. She looked down at Zara, who was now playing absently with the edge of her mother's braid. "What did they call you?" she asked. "Jonas," he turned finally. "Just a name, no deeper meaning. Human names usually don't." She considered that. "In my tongue, names are gifts. They're sung when a child is born, layered with the hopes of the parents. Mine means one who carries starlight." He looked at her, then really looked. His gaze didn't linger uncomfortably. It simply stayed. "That's fitting," he said. Her chest tightened at the sincerity in his voice. He turned back to the food processor. "There's not much here that tastes good. Everything's old or engineered for endurance, not flavor. I've got a few spice cubes left. Might help. Is it safe for her?" she asked, nodding toward Zara. "I'll test a little first. If it burns my tongue, we won't feed it to a 4-year-old. Zara peeked up from her mother's lap. 4.5, she whispered. Jonas grinned. "My mistake." Vera blinked. Zara rarely corrected anyone. Even in the commune, she had been shy, cautious, always quiet, as if apologizing for her presence. But now her voice had no fear in it. Jonas brought over 2 bowls, one larger, one smaller. The smaller one was warm to the touch, filled with mashed roots, fiber grain, and softened dried fruit. A hint of something sweet drifted upward. Vera tasted hers first, testing it with a careful tongue. It wasn't good, but it was warm and nourishing, and more than she had expected to be given without price. Zara took a bite, made a face, then giggled. "It tastes like wormstone." Vera started to scold her gently, but Jonas just chuckled. "Not the worst review I've had." They ate slowly. Zara finished her entire portion and leaned back against her mother's side. Content. After the meal, Jonas began sorting through a crate labeled archive debris. Inside were data chips, damaged memory modules, and fragments of old Earth literature. "I've been salvaging bits of the old Tower," he said. "Most of it's junk, but some of these have partial story files. A few are alien scripted. Yours, maybe." She tilted her head. "You kept them?" "I like stories," he said simply. She stood and stepped carefully toward the crate. Zara followed, curious. She pulled a glowing shard from the top, faint text still flickering across its surface. "This one glows like Papa's book," Zara said. Eyes wide. Vera stilled. She hadn't heard her daughter say that word in months. Jonas didn't ask. He only handed her another chip with a simple phrase printed in faint glyphs. "Hearthbound, third cycle lullabies." Vera held it like something sacred. Later, after Zara had curled up beside the heater and drifted into a nap, Vera remained seated by the crate, one chip still in hand. Jonas leaned against the wall, sipping from a mug of lukewarm synthetic calf. "You were a mother before the exile," he said softly. She didn't answer for a long time. "I was a caretaker, midwife, ritual guide for the newly born." Her voice was quiet, even, but controlled. "After my partner died, they said I was incomplete. A single parent can't carry starlight alone. That's what the elders told me." "And you believed them?" "I had to. That's what made exile real." Jonas looked at her, the light casting shadows across his face. "You kept your daughter alive through everything." "I didn't save her," she said. "You did," he replied. "I showed up. You carried her." That silence again. But this time, she didn't want to break it. She simply sat beside him, watching the light flicker across the broken chip in her hand. Zara's soft breathing filled the room. The warmth held steady. No one moved, and for once, no one had to. The evening began like many before it, quiet, steady, filled with the low rhythm of reclaimed life. Vera sat near the heater, her knees drawn close, the mended threads of Zara's new sleeping wrap looped between her fingers. Her daughter lay curled nearby, sound asleep with one arm flung across the blanket like a tiny guardian. Her breathing was slow and even, the faint glow in her temples no longer flickering but steady. Her body had grown softer with rest, and her dreams, Vera sensed, were no longer haunted by frost or hunger. She should have felt peace. But inside her chest, something twisted. The quiet wasn't heavy with dread anymore, but neither was it light. Something was shifting between her and Jonas. It wasn't a threat, if anything. That was what frightened her. The way her body had begun to relax when he entered the room. The way her thoughts slowed in his presence. The way she didn't always feel the need to watch the exits. It had been too long since she'd trusted a silence shared with someone else. Jonas sat at the far end of the shelter, legs stretched out before him, one arm resting lazily on the back of the bench. He was reading, or at least pretending to, an old chip scroll he'd salvaged from the archives. The screen flickered occasionally, half the text dimmed by age. His lips moved slightly, murmuring the words to himself. Vera didn't realize she was staring until he spoke without looking up. "You're holding your breath again," she blinked. "What? I can feel it. Like the air tenses up around you when you do." His tone wasn't judgmental, just matter-of-fact, as though he were noting the weather. "I wasn't aware," she said. He finally glanced up. His gaze met hers, steady, unflinching. "You do it when you're about to say something," he added. "Or when you want to, but don't." She looked away. There was a moment, long and still, where neither spoke. The room buzzed with the hum of warm air through ductwork and the slow burn of recycled heat against the floor. Then she rose. Her movements were slow but purposeful as she walked toward the cabinet near the console. She opened it, withdrew a water flask, and poured half into a steel cup. It gave her hands something to do something safer than speaking. Jonas watched her quietly. She took a sip and set the cup down without turning. Do you ever wish you'd kept running? A pause? No, he said, but I used to. She nodded slightly. That's the difference between guilt and grief, I think. One keeps you moving. The other keeps you still. He stood then, the chip scroll forgotten, and crossed to where she was. Not close, just enough that she could feel his presence. I don't think we've ever asked each other directly, he said. But do you want to talk about it? About what happened? Before. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her palms on the edge of the counter. Her voice, when it came, was calm, controlled. I was supposed to be a symbol. Crystal dawn circle. I carried ceremony, sang rites. Of renewal. My hands were used to hold life, not shield it. She paused, her reflection in the metal panel across from her flickering in the low light blue skin. Tired eyes, the faint gleam of old braids tucked behind her shoulders. When my partner died in the energy storm, I wasn't permitted to grieve. I was told to chant, to light essence oils to bless his passage. But I couldn't. My voice broke. I wailed. She looked at her fingers, curling slightly against the metal. That was my sin? Jonas didn't speak. They said I was fractured, she continued, that my inability to maintain balance would poison my child's spirit. They believed suffering was the sign of spiritual decay, that I must have carried shame in a past life, that the gods had found me unfit. She straightened slowly, as though lifting the weight of her own story cost her something physical. I told them I would raise Zara. Alone. Without temples. Without approval. I was not cast out. She glanced at him then, her voice almost bitter. I was unbound. It's different. What does that mean? He asked softly. No name, no starlight. No one permitted to touch us. My daughter wasn't considered real anymore. He stepped closer, still careful, still slow, but there was something in his expression now. Fury, buried deep but real. I'm sorry, he said. No, she replied. You're not the one who should be. She turned away from him again, pretending to busy herself with rewrapping the cup, her hands trembling slightly. I thought about ending it once, she said suddenly. His breath caught. The day before we found you. I considered just lying down in the dust and not waking up. I told myself it would be peaceful, that she'd go quietly asleep against my skin, that no one would ever have to see how much I'd failed. Her voice cracked at the last word, not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, uninvited fissure. Jonas stepped forward and placed a hand gently, lightly, on her shoulder. He didn't squeeze. He didn't speak. But she didn't pull away. She turned slowly and met his gaze. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. There were no tears left for that. You were the first person who didn't look at me like I was something broken. You never were, he said. You were just carrying too much alone. Their silence held then not with distance, but with mutual gravity. After a time, Vera sat again, pulling the small cloth from her pouch. The partially reworked cloak for Zara, patched now with newer fabric and more durable thread, lay folded beside her. She picked up her needle and resumed stitching. Jonas sat nearby, close enough to feel her warmth, but not close enough to take it. They didn't speak for a while. Eventually Vera said, You said you lost someone too. He nodded. My nephew, 7 years old. Evacuation panic. My whistleblowing delayed corporate protocols. That delay kept him from boarding the last shuttle out. I watched the dome collapse from the other side of the corridor. Vera's hand slowed, her stitching pausing mid-thread. I ran here to disappear. But I think part of me was hoping someone would come looking. Even if it was just to blame me. She looked at him, truly looked. Not just his face, but what rested beneath it. What he'd chosen not to say for days, maybe weeks. Do you still want to be found? His answer was immediate. No. She nodded once, then returned to her stitching. The heater clicked softly in the background. Zara murmured something in her sleep, rolling onto her side. A patch of starlight refracted from the dome above stretched across the floor and touched the edge of the blanket where she lay. Jonas stood and reached for the old story chip resting on the shelf beside him. He turned it over in his hand. I found this one this morning. It's not much, just a fairy tale fragment, but the last line stuck. She glanced up. He read, and the warmth that came after the storm did not ask for thanks or history or why it was needed. It simply stayed. She exhaled, her shoulders softening. Then, very quietly, she said, "Stay." He looked at her and nodded. "I will." Dust began to settle along the inner edges of the greenhouse dome, just a trickle, nothing dramatic, but enough to beat along the rim of the cracked polyglass and drip down into the soil beds below. It was the first time in years that any part of Cathera Station looked like it might breathe again. Jonas wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve, smudging a streak of soil across his cheek. He had been working all morning, clearing ice-choked vents and reconnecting auxiliary solar feeds to the geotherm loop. The repairs were crude, the resources limited, but the warmth was holding. For now, that was a victory. Inside, the light filtering through the panels caught on silver strands of long hair. Vera was crouched near one of the beds, carefully pressing her fingers into a section of softened loam. Her sleeves were pushed up, her hands stained from the work. Zara sat cross-legged nearby, a cracked pot in her lap filled with smooth stones she'd collected from the maintenance corridor. She sorted them by color and shape, humming under her breath. It was the first time Jonas had heard her hum. The dome wasn't beautiful, not yet. It was rusted in places, its structure bent from years of weather abuse. But there was something sacred about the scene inside it. This alien mother with soil beneath her fingernails, her child tracing patterns in light, and the faint green of a sprouting vine breaking through frost for the first time in a decade. Vera looked up and caught him watching. "You've done this before," she said. "I've broken things," he replied. "This is my first time trying to make something grow." Her expression didn't change, but her voice softened. "You're good at it." He didn't answer, just stepped over to the center platform and opened one of the seed storage boxes. Half the contents were ruin degraded by years of failed systems and thin atmosphere, but he'd managed to salvage a few viable strains, mostly hardy root vegetables and moss cultures that thrived in low sunlight. Vera joined him. Her hands brushed past his as she reached for a packet. The contact was light, intentional. She held up a thin, dark seed with narrow ridges along the hull. These were part of the second circle offerings, a fertility strain cultivated on lunar temples. "You recognize them?" he asked. They were planted during blessing seasons. If the sprout reached full bloom, it was a sign that the dreamers would be born healthy. Dreamers? Children. Jonas studied the seed between her fingers. Seems like a good sign then. They worked side by side after that, silent but present. There was something strangely rhythmic about planting. Dig, place, press, repeat. Like falling into sync with someone without needing to speak. Zara offered suggestions on where the best light was, and they indulged him without correcting her. Logic. Later, back inside the main shelter, the air carried a slightly earthy smell, fresh, almost sweet. Zara sat with her stones, arranging them into a circular pattern by the heater. Vera washed her hands at the pump sink, pausing to scrub the dirt from her knuckles. The water was tepid, rationed, but it was enough. She dried them on a towel and turned to where Jonas stood by the console. "I want to help more," she said. "You already are. I mean structurally. I can work building. I know how to insulate with scrap fiber, and I can seal ducks. You've been doing this alone for too long." He studied her, not critically, just with the calm focus she was beginning to recognize as uniquely his. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "I'm not trying to," she replied. "I just ... I want to feel useful again. Not just surviving." He nodded once. "Then we'll start tomorrow with the vent hatches. They need resealing." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I can do that." That night, after Zara fell asleep in her blanket nest near the heater, Jonas and Vera remained seated on the floor, backs resting against the same steel beam. Neither spoke at first. The firelight flickered low, casting long shadows. The silence between them was no longer hollow, it felt full, restful. "Today felt different," she said finally. He nodded. It did. Zara smiled without flinching. "That hasn't happened I can't even remember." Jonas looked over at the child's sleeping form. "She's strong. She's trusting." "That's harder than strong." She picked at the edge of her sleeve. "Do you miss them?" He didn't ask who she meant. "Every day," he said. She hesitated. "Do you think it's possible to stop carrying it?" He leaned his head back against the beam, eyes on the ceiling. "No," he said after a long pause. "But I think sometimes, when we build something new, something alive, it makes the weight feel worth carrying." She was quiet for a long time. Then, without warning, she shifted slightly closer, just enough that her shoulder touched his. Light. Contact, no pressure, but she didn't move away. And he didn't flinch. Her voice came quiet, almost inaudible. "When I was cast out, they told me I was unclean, spiritually malformed. That no child should grow under a mother who couldn't carry. Starlight alone." Jonas looked at her. "You've kept that girl alive on nothing but hope and instinct," he said. "There's nothing unclean about that." She didn't answer, but she stayed there, shoulder against his, and for the first time since she had been exiled, she let herself lean just a little into someone else's warmth. The wind had teeth again. It struck the shelter walls in rhythmic pulses, testing their strength as if trying to remember how they once caved. The night before had been calm, quiet laughter, the warmth of a shared meal, Zara falling asleep mid-sentence. But now the stillness had cracked, and something colder was trying to creep back, and Jonas stood by the hatch, suit half-zipped, radio clipped to his collar. The console behind him blinked with a low-frequency pulse, an alert that should have stayed dormant. A signal flare, short-range, automatic, but unmistakably active. Vera watched from across the room, wrapping Zara tighter in a layered sling. Her daughter clung to her chest, half asleep, sensing the tension more than the threat. "You sure it was the relay?" she asked. Jonas nodded, jaw tight. "It's not just environmental chatter. It's a data burst on an old evac loop. Something triggered the tower, probably a rebound from the last solar spike." Vera's fingers paused mid-motion. Who could be listening? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned over the console again, checking signal decay. His eyes narrowed. Anyone. A scavenger crew, a privateer, maybe even an old corporate patrol looking for salvage rights. Her voice dropped. "And they'd come here?" "If they think there's something worth taking, yes." His gaze met hers. "They won't be expecting people. But if they find us ... He didn't need to finish. Vera adjusted Zara's sling and stood straighter. "What do we need to do?" "I need to reach the relay tower before it cycles again. If I can shut it down manually, I might be able to kill the loop before it pings anything long range." "You mean you're going out in that?" She nodded toward the hull beyond the sealed doors. "I have to." There was a beat of silence between them. Then, "You're not going alone." Jonas shook his head. "It's not safe." "I didn't ask if it was safe." Her voice was low, even, but sharp with something that had lived buried under her skin for years. "You don't get to shut me out when danger comes. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. It's not about shutting you out. Then what is it? His shoulders tensed. It's about knowing what it costs to lose someone when you're the one who said, "Stay here, I'll handle it." She stared at him, then stepped forward and reached for the spare thermal suit hanging by the locker. Then don't say it. They moved quickly after that. Jonas handed her an older model of his own suit, slightly oversized, worn, but intact. She layered it over her clothes, securing the collar seals while he packed 2 field kits, one for signal jamming, the other for line cuts. He watched her movements carefully, wordlessly noting how steady her hands were. She's done this before, he muttered. Vera caught it but didn't reply. They left Zara curled inside a heat cocoon, the emergency node blinking gently by her side. Vera knelt beside her daughter before they left, brushing a hand over her cheek. "We'll be back soon, little flame." Zara mumbled something in sleep, curling tighter around the blanket. The outer hatch opened with a pressurized hiss, and the storm met them like a living thing. The wind shoved against their bodies, slicing through exposed fabric. Dust gusted across the slope, and visibility dropped to a narrow cone ahead of their headlamps. The harness link between them remained taut, a safety line, threaded from Jonas's pack to Vera's waist. They walked without speaking, boots crunching over half-frozen crystal crusts and old metal plates, buried beneath the drifts. The relay tower loomed ahead, a skeletal frame, bristling with rusted sensors and frost-blackened conduits, as they climbed. The narrow access ladder, the beacon blinked above them, slow, steady. Alive. Vera reached the top platform first, crouching beside a power junction. Jonas joined her, opening the lower access panel with a pop of cold sealed bolts. Sparks flickered. Inside, relays on a dual pulse loop, he said over the wind. One feed is corrupted, the other's fused to backup memory. I can't shut it down normally. Meaning? He looked up. I have to burn the entire board. Trigger a hard fault across both circuits. Her expression darkened. Will it damage the structure? No, he paused, but the pulse to short it may arc. She reached for the toolkit. Then I'll do it. No. Vera's eyes locked with his. Don't try to protect me with old guilt. He stood slowly, tension lining every part of him. That's not what this is. Then tell me what it is. He looked away, voice raw. I've lost people because I thought I could save them alone. I'm not doing it again. Then don't. She handed him the insulated cutters. Do it with me. Their hands moved together. After that, Jonas clipped one side of the pulse lid, holding the clamp steady. Vera took the cutter to the other junction. The wind howled around them, shaking the tower slightly beneath their feet. Now, he said. Sparks exploded in a burst of blue and orange. The beacon above flickered once, twice, then died. Silence returned. Not peace. Not yet. But silence. They stood still for a long moment, catching their breath. Then, without speaking, they climbed back down. By the time they reached the shelter, the wind had softened. The worst had passed. Inside, Zara was still asleep, her tiny hands wrapped around the edge of the blanket like it was a promise. The heater pulsed steadily, casting orange light across the walls. Jonas peeled off his gloves, wincing as he flexed his fingers, burned but functional. Vera watched him, her voice barely above a whisper. You didn't have to let me come. I did. He looked at her. You've been walking through storms longer than I have. She stepped closer. You trusted me. You've earned it. Their eyes met then. Before she could stop herself, she reached out slowly, deliberately, and rested her hand over his burned one. He flinched, not from pain but from surprise. I'm staying, she said. He swallowed hard. I know. And for the first time since he set foot on this frozen world, Jonas believed that someone might grow here. The sun never quite rose on Kethera Station. But that morning the sky lightened to a gentler gray. The storm had broken sometime in the early hours, leaving a strange stillness behind. It wasn't silence the way the moon usually gave it, cold and empty, but something warmer, as if the wind had simply tired itself out and given way to breath. Inside the shelter, the air was tinged with the scent of damp soil and old metal, but it was no longer the scent of survival. It was the smell of somewhere lived in, somewhere safe. Vera woke slowly, blinking against the low amber glow of the wall lights. Zara was curled against her side, half buried under her new patchwork blanket, one thumb in her mouth. A small, round stone glowed faintly beside her pillow, the one she had found outside and named Heartlight. She watched her daughter for a while, listening to her soft breathing, letting the comfort of that sound root her fully in the moment. Then her eyes moved to the other figure across the room. Jonas had fallen asleep upright in the old recliner, head tilted to the side, arms crossed over his chest. He looked like someone who rarely allowed himself that kind of rest and hadn't meant to this time either. His hair was a little longer now, falling messily over his brow. His clothes were worn, his hands still healing from the burn, but his face, he looked peaceful. She sat up slowly, letting her legs slide over the edge of the mattress. There was no cold bite beneath her feet this morning. The floors were warm. The vents hummed steadily. The geothermal system, against all odds, was holding. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake Zara, and crossed the room to the storage rack. The warmth in her muscles felt honest, not forced by adrenaline or thin hunger, but earned. There was bread now, grown from the moss cultures they'd labored over. There was water that didn't taste like metal, blankets that didn't scratch, a rhythm, a life. She didn't speak until he stirred. Your neck's going to hate you later. Jonas blinked, groaned softly, and gave her a crooked smile. It already does. He sat up, rubbing the side of his neck with one hand, eyes sweeping toward the sleeping child and then back to her. There was no panic in the glance, just a check, just care. Didn't mean to fall asleep, he added. You did, her voice was quiet, steady, and you were safe enough to let it happen. He looked down, then smiled again, smaller this time. That's new. She walked toward the window and pushed open the slat just enough to let in the view. The wind had left long spiral trails across the dust outside. The solar dome over the greenhouse gleamed beneath a thin crust of ice. The crops held, she said. They're hardy, he replied, standing beside her. And stubborn. I guess that's how things grow on dead moons. They grow because someone stayed to tend them. He looked at her for a long moment, and she didn't look away. Jonas, she said. Yeah? If someone came now, if a transport landed right outside that door and offered you a way off this place, what would you say? He didn't hesitate. I'd ask if they had extra gloves. She smiled at that. Then her voice softened. But would you go? He turned to look out the window again. No, he said. I think I'm finally where I was always supposed to be. She nodded, then reached into the pocket of her robe and drew out the old ceremonial cloth, the first one Zara had been swaddled in. It was frayed now, the glyphs faded, but still intact. Still hers. I want to burn it, she said. Jonas blinked. I thought it was sacred. It was. But it belonged to a version of me that believed her only value was decided by others. She held it up to the light. I carried shame in this, and fear, and silence. He said nothing, but he didn't look away. I want to make something new, she continued. For her, not a relic of beginning. She moved to the hearth plate and ignited the smallest flame. The fabric caught quickly, curling into light with a soft hiss. They watched it vanish together. That night, they ate by the heater simple. Food, warm broth, root mash, a small green sprout for color. Zara, eyes heavy with sleep, leaned against Vera's shoulder and whispered, "Mother, the fire sounds like singing." She kissed the top of her daughter's head. Later, when Zara had been tucked into bed, Vera and Jonas remained near the low flame. No words, just warmth. Her head eventually found his shoulder. His hand reached for hers, and this time he didn't flinch. She exhaled slowly. "You know, there's still a part of me that thinks this is temporary, that something will tear it away." "I know," he said. "But there's another part," she added, "that wonders maybe this is what happens when you stop waiting for the cold to win." He shifted slightly, turning toward her, his forehead resting gently against hers. "No more running?" he asked. She closed her eyes. "No more." They sat like that for a long time, forehead to forehead, hands intertwined, listening to the fire hum between them. No alarms, no signals, no more endings. Only the slow, deliberate act of staying. The greenhouse grew stronger in the days that followed. Zara stopped waking up in fear. She stopped whispering, "Is it safe?" before falling asleep. Instead, she began asking questions about stars, about building, about how seeds knew to stretch toward light. Her laughter came easily now, full and bright, echoing off the metal walls that once only held silence. Jonas built her a wooden toy from old panel scraps. Vera helped her decorate it with crushed plant dye and thread from their clothing. When Zara gave it a name, Starbug neither. Adult corrected her. Outside, Cathura Station remained what it had always been, cold, distant, forgotten. But inside, something had changed. Not in an instant, but slowly, like moss on stone, like fire from hands once too cold to move. And as the nights came softer and the winds no longer felt like warnings, Vera lay in bed one evening, her daughter, asleep at her side, and whispered into the warm air between them, "I stayed." And the silence answered, "So did he." The light was different now. It had grown soft, not harsh, not glaring, but rich with something that shimmered faintly through. The repaired glass of the greenhouse dome. It scattered gold across the rows of growing things, warming the ground, soaking into soil once believed barren. It wasn't Earth's spring, but it was their spring. Vera knelt by the planter bed, hands deep in the loam as she harvested a row of pale orange roots. They came out clean, full, stubbornly curved. Her fingers worked efficiently, rhythmically, brushing dirt into the bins beside her. Beside her sat a basket woven from shredded insulation tubing and dried vine fibers, now half filled with moss fruit and starter bulbs. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, hair tied back loosely with a strip of dyed cloth. Her skin glowed in the light. She hummed under her breath, not a ritual song, not an old rite, but something newer, something wordless, not far off. Zara ran barefoot through the greenhouse's central corridor, shrieking with delight as she chased. After a hover drone Jonas had modified to wobble in unpredictable spirals. The girl's long silver hair streamed behind her like a comet's tail. Her temple markings glowed with joy. She wore a tunic that hung slightly too large and was stained. With berry juice and soil, she looked radiant. "Mother," she called, dodging a vine. "It's flying the wrong way." "That's because you rewired the wings backward." "Little flame," Vera called back, smiling. A low chuckle echoed from the far side of the dome. Jonas emerged from behind a scaffold wall, sleeves rolled, a smear of engine grease across one cheek, holding up a new solar conduit. He looked utterly content, half scientist, half farmer, all human. "I warned you the drone would become self-aware," he called to Zara. "Now look at it rebelling already." The girl collapsed into the moss with a giggle. "It wants to be a bird." "It wants to crash into the tomatoes," Jonas muttered, wiping his hands on his belt. Vera stood slowly, brushing off her knees, and crossed toward him with the basket in her arms. She nodded toward the solar track above. "You got it working?" 4. Now, he took the basket from her hands and glanced inside. That's more than last week. The soil's stabilizing, and we're getting better at this. We're doing more than surviving, he said. They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching Zara chase the drone again, now crawling after it through tall ferns and edible moss. This used to be a ruin, she said quietly. Jonas glanced at her. Now it's a home. She turned toward him, eyes shining. Thank you for staying, he shook his head. Thank you for making it worth staying for. He leaned down, and she met him halfway, a kiss shared in the sunlight, simple and certain. Not new, not hesitant, but rooted. They didn't notice the drone finally veering into the tomato vine. Zara burst into laughter, tumbling backward in a tangle of leaves. When night came, because night still came, even in spring they lit the hearth, plate and sat together outside the shelter, wrapped in soft thread blankets, sharing bread and stew. Watching the stars tilt slowly above the dome. Zara fell asleep in Vera's lap, fingers curled around one of Jonas's patched gloves, the worn leather clutched like a talisman. They stayed there long after she drifted off, just the two of them, listening to the hum of quiet systems, the wind brushing softly against the outer shell, the faint rustle of growing life. No alarms, no ice, no fear. Just warmth and the sound of something new blooming between them, a life, a season, and a home. That would not be taken.